that leadership is in your DNA. Some of it you can be taught, but either you have it or you don't.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. This is Mike Howard. I thank you for all of the comments that all of you have made to date, subscribing to this podcast. I really appreciate the feedback because it helps us make our podcast a lot better in the future. We've had some great guests in the past. We've got a great lineup of people ahead, and I can't wait to delve into today's podcast with a really good friend of mine. But of course, I have to do the usual shameless plug. So please get my new book. My new book will be coming out this July. It's called Executing Ronin Leadership, but current book has been out for a while. Ronin Leadership, and you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on MikeHowardAuthor.com. Really appreciate all the feedback on that too, and I can't wait to tell you more about the new book that'll be coming out, but got to save that for another time. So without further ado, a very good friend of mine, Bonnie Michelman, who's the Director of Safety and Security at Massachusetts General, is our guest today. I've known Bonnie for many, many years. There are a fair amount of you that are listening to this podcast that are subscribers that are in the security industry, so you know Bonnie. But there are a lot of you that have subscribed that you're not in the industry and you just want to learn about leadership. And so I'm going to let Bonnie talk about her background, but suffice it to say, Bonnie is truly one of the champions, one of the leaders in the security industry, in the health industry, and just in the leadership industry, so to speak. I've known her for many years. When I was a baby CSO, I've always looked up to her. I've always tried to sometimes emulate her, but I definitely taken best practices from her. And so Bonnie, thank you for being on this podcast, because I know you're extremely busy and taking the time out of your day to just hang out with us for a little bit.
My pleasure. I'm honored to be here, Mike. Thank you.
You're welcome. So as I told you before, we're going to handle this more like a fireside chat because we've known each other for a long time. So walk through your background. How did you end up getting where you are? I mean, I assume you didn't always want to be in the security industry or the law enforcement field or that kind of stuff. So what was your journey like?
Well, I was on my way to law school, and I had gotten into some very good law schools, and then all of a sudden I had no money. So I had applied for a graduate degree in criminology at Northeastern University. They gave me a free ride to come do it, so I decided to come do it. And then I figured I'd go to law school after. While I was there doing that master's degree, I got exposed to the whole field of security management. I was fascinated by it. I did some work in it. I did some internships and some other work. And I decided instead of going to law school after that master's, I would go get an MBA because I was very interested in business. So I did that while I was doing my first leadership job. And my first leadership job was at a Fortune 500 company where I was the security manager, and I had about 60 people working for me. I was about 22 years old, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing, admittedly. Now, part of me believes, and I know, Mike, you feel this way, I think too, that leadership is in your DNA. Some of it you can be taught, but either you have it or you don't.
Yeah.
And I kind of always was a leader. I was head of my Girl Scout troop, and I was captain of the softball team. And so I guess I had some leadership, but this was very different, especially being young and being a female in a field that was entirely male. So there was a lot of testing going on, and there was a lot of nights I came home and thought, what am I doing? And but I learned from some good people that I watched, people that didn't do things the way I thought they should have. So I learned a lot from people that didn't lead very well. And then I learned a lot from people who did lead very well. And I decided to do my best to be a great listener and a great support to people so that they'd know I really was on their side, but that they'd also know that I could make decisions and I could set limits and that it wasn't about them being successful and not me. It was about both of us being successful, or they were not going to be there. And, I got people working with each other who had not worked with each other before. Talk about lack of diversity. So that they could only be successful by working as a team and working together. And people got very excited. It took a while, but they got excited because they started achieving and accomplishing things and finding challenges and seeing that their reputation in the company was ascending and that their skills were improving and that they were kind of going out of their comfort zones a little, and that felt okay.
Right.
And they weren't getting crucified if they made a mistake by going out of their comfort zones.
Yes.
And that was my first real inroad. And since that time, I have led, thousands of people in the jobs I've had. And I currently am the executive director in Mass General Hospital, where I have 400 people, but I'm also the senior leader for security for the whole corporation, which is 90,000 people and 15 hospitals and over 900 satellite facilities. So there's a lot. And sometimes you've got formal leadership and sometimes you have informal leadership. And I think you have to do both really well. And sometimes those of us who are not in formal leadership positions, but who can informally lead and be an influence informally, that can be far more valuable in many ways. And it's often the way people will ascend and move their career, move the trajectory of their career forward. Because people sometimes don't even know they're good leaders. So,
Right.
Mike, don't you think people sometimes don't even know that the leadership skills they possess internally, maybe they've not been tested, maybe no one's given them feedback?
Right. I mean, they don't consider themselves leaders. They've never been told they were leaders, but they're exhibiting those kind of traits that you appreciate in leaders and you expect leaders to have. You're spot on. So yeah, I mean, it that begs a question, because I do agree with you that leadership at some way, shape, or form has to be in your DNA, right? But do you think that if someone doesn't have that DNA, could they still end up becoming a leader of some sort?
I think they can oftentimes, not all the time. I think they can become skilled at being persuasive and motivating and being a good coach and making decisions. And I think learning to be strategic and learning to be visionary, I think that's a little harder, but I think with enough practice and enough people that you see do it well, it can become part of your DNA too.
Yeah. Agreed. When I was writing my first book, and I talked about I talk a lot about the steps that I made along the way, which I think we all do in our journey. We hopefully get better, and then hopefully some good successes. So is there anything in your background that you can think of where, as you were learning and growing, I think we're always learning and growing as leaders, but where a decision you made didn't go the right way, but it was something that you learned from it and made you a better leader, going forward?
I'm sure there were lots of them. I think there have been times where I've given people too much rope, hoping that they were gonna be good people and do the right thing.
Yes.
And I'm a person who's a big forgiver and a person who believes in lots of chances. But there comes a time where you're spending too much energy, negative energy, on someone that really isn't trying to help themselves or the team, and you're not giving enough of your energy to people that deserve it. So I think I have been guilty of that at times.
Yeah, I think you and I probably share the same kind of leadership DNA, frankly, because that struck a bell with me when you talked about that. I'm the same way.
I will give you one example, though. Early on in that very first job, in fact, there was a woman there who was kind of an administrative person. She was the only woman, but she was a very strong personality, and she was like the mother of the team. And she had ruled the roost before I came. And frankly, I don't think she liked having me there at all. I know she didn't. And she tried to sabotage me in every way she could. She tried to make me look bad. She tried to, vet people away from me and toward her. And I tried very hard to, kind of ignore it and try to be just very kind and good to her. And it wasn't working. So one day I sat down with her and I said, here's the deal. Her name was Kathy. And I said, here's the deal, Kathy. This isn't going well. I am going to work with you a lot closer. I'm going to get you involved in some things that I'm involved in that I think will excite you.
Mhm.
But if there is one more piece um, of disloyalty that I feel for you, if I feel like you're trying to be divisive to the team, if I feel like you're not trying to help me be successful as much as I'm trying to help you, you are out. And we have 30 days to decide that. And I will have no qualms about cutting the ties. I would love you to be here because you're smart and you're great and you know what you're doing and you have a good work ethic. But it won't be at all of use to me if you continue to play these games where you're insecure and you're trying to pit people against each other.
Mhm.
So which is it? What do you want? And she came around and she became, a great partner, a great employee, and we worked well together after that. But I think I needed to be tough.
Sure. Yeah, you had to be direct. You've been in the game a while, and both in the health industry, the security industry. You're a trailblazer, and obviously we've talked about this before, and you mentioned that you're one of the few women that initially that were in the industry. We have more now. We could use more. Do you? How is in your optic the status of how well women professionals learn to network with each other and support each other? I mean, is it getting better? I mean, what's the state of play in all that?
Well, people ask me that all the time, and it's such an odd question to me because the people that I love working with everyone, but having female colleagues has been nothing short of miraculous and so satisfying for me. And being able to mentor women in the field and young women and women in leadership, even not in the field, to your point, has been one of the most gratifying parts of my career. But I do know that particularly in those industries, and I've seen it with some friends in engineering and other industries where women are a minority, that sometimes women try to take each other down if they feel that there's such competition for a particular job or role or being kind of the special one. And there was even a book written many years ago about that. I don't recall the name, about women pulling women down from the glass ceiling, not men. And that's just very horrific to hear. I think it's changed a lot, though. And I think because there is far more underrepresented minorities, both culturally, racially, and from a gender perspective in our field and in others, hopefully that has gone away and that people look at each other and recognize that it takes a village, and to be able to help each other be successful helps you yourself be individually far more successful as you move through your roles and your career.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I asked that question, is because I want to dissuade people that there are situations, and it could be with men and women, minorities, whatever, where at times people try to undercut somebody else. But I want to get away from this image that women are always trying to undercut each other, because that's not.
Oh, I don't think so at all. And I don't think it's any more than men trying to who undercut people, to your point. And, I call those people the 5%ers, the 5% of people in the world that if you dropped $20 bills at their feet, they would complain they weren't $100 bills. And they're going to complain or bitch no matter what, because they're likely very insecure people that haven't been encouraged or don't have much self-esteem. You're going to find those in every field, in every place you are. Hopefully they're rare, but you just don't spend a lot of time on them and you move on, and that's how you beat that.
Yeah, exactly. The last few years have been fairly tumultuous, to say the least. You and I have been on calls where I'm retired, so I didn't have to deal with the whole COVID thing, but you had to deal with a lot of different situations. Something I like to ask leaders is, like, how do you keep your head together? You've got all this stuff coming, you got troops to take care of, strategies to implement and to build and execute off of. You've got budget issues, HR issues, you got all this stuff. How do you keep it together? What do you do to keep yourself sane as a leader?
That's a great question. And I think most of us, if we were honest, would say we don't do it perfectly all the time.
Mhm.
But I think the longer you do it, and life isn't perfect, and you have a lot of land, you got a lot of issues along the way. And certainly something like a pandemic is one of those. You learn a lot about resilience and you learn a lot about pivoting. I think one way that I've learned to do it is I work really hard, but I play really hard too. And even though I don't play as much as I want to sometimes because of work, I make sure I have a very strong network, as you know, of friends like yourself and others, and a great family life. And I try to compartmentalize. I really do. And I do that better than I used to. I can remember the first many years of my career, Friday afternoon, I did not cut it off. And I would
Right.
it would be bombing in my head what was going on, and I'd be upset. And now I do try to compartmentalize a little, because I know if I don't, I can't rejuvenate.
Right.
And those landmines that we all are going to run across our whole life, you have to know that, and you have to be optimistic that you'll get through them. And they will, in some ways, enhance you, even if it's by building strength or identifying something that you didn't know about a weakness. So I think that's important, to have some balance. I haven't always had balance. I still don't have the best balance, but I'm working on it.
Right.
To have people you can talk to, Mike, I think that's another strategy that you can let your hair down with. As you well know, those of us like Mike and I who have been very involved in organizations, ASIS, ISMA, I've been involved in the healthcare organization. Those people become our second family, and we really can share with them what's really going on. And in all likelihood, they're either going through it too or have gone through it. So may have some great words of wisdom too. So that's how and having a great team of people around me. I mean, I've stayed in this job for a while. It's expanded a lot, but I've stayed in it because the people that have worked for me for many, many, many years, most of them over 20 years. And we know we have each other's back. We know we can rely on each other. We know we bring out each other's best most of the time. Everybody has their dysfunctional family once in a while, but that's really important too. Because if I didn't feel like I could trust and respect and love the people that I work with, it wouldn't be worth it for me to do it.
Right. Now, I hope those of you who are listening to this podcast, I really want you to glean on this, because this is perfect. Because leaders are getting, you have so much more pressures now than ever before. And so what Bonnie said was spot on, being able to compartmentalize, being able to take yourself away from the situation, surround yourself with family and friends, networking, and just making sure that you're mindful, that you're not the end all and be all. And that was perfect, because I think people need to hear that, because you and I are both type A's and we want to always go for it. And younger leaders are definitely wanting to prove themselves, but not to the point where they burn out and then they're no good to their troops, right? So
let me add one thing to that, to
okay.
what you're saying, because you just reminded me. It's about not picking every battle. It's about taking yourself lightly, less seriously, which I'm trying to do much better than I ever did before. I think younger people sometimes have a good work ethic, but they balance much better than we ever did. And part of me sometimes gets annoyed by it, and part of me absolutely admires and respects them. But it really is about like taking yourself lightly, figuring out what's a first world problem and what you really need to battle, not choosing every battle because nobody wants that, and realizing not everything's a first world problem, or everything is a first world problem. Most things are a first world problem.
Yeah, no, I like that. I love that phrase. And of course, as leaders, everybody's looking at us, right? And so we lead by example, and how we comport ourselves. If we're running around with our fire in our head all day long, that's how they're going to do it, right? Because I think that's the way the boss does it.
Yeah, I worked for a leader. Staying calm, even if you're not feeling it inside, is so important, because when there's an emergency, particularly in our world of enterprise risk and security and law enforcement, when there's an emergency, people just watch me and my team. They see how we're dealing with it, how we're feeling, if we're looking like we're completely scared to death, or if we're looking like we've got it. So even if we don't really have it, we've got to be very calm inside. I worked for a guy once, speaking of leadership, who was actually one of my most favorite mentors, because he taught me the most, he pushed me the most. He was hard as hell, but he gave me a big chance. But he was a very emotional guy, and when things weren't going well, truth to power was not easy to give him, because he would kind of go nuts and sometimes shoot the messenger, and he would operate in a very emotional, reactive way when things weren't going well. And that wasn't a good thing to see. So you can be passionate, but you can't be reactive.
Right. Something you mentioned a little bit earlier in the conversation about the things that you learned from great leaders or people that that mentored you and you emulated, but you learned things from the not so great leaders, right? What were some of the things you learned from the not so great leaders as you were coming up in your leadership path?
I learned that not recognizing that how you make people feel is far more important than what you say and do.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
that even if you are correcting someone and you are correct about why you're correcting someone or what you're trying to teach them, doing it in a way that doesn't make them feel like you've completely demolished their pride and their integrity, and not doing it publicly. I knew of a
Yes.
leader once in a place I worked that she would rail on people publicly, and they would, you would just want to sink under the table. I knew a leader that was quite insecure about his performance. So when other people's performance in jobs he had had was better than the performance he had shown, he was quite horrible to them, who they now worked for him now.
Mhm.
I'm not explaining that well, but to me, you don't have to know, nor should you know, everything the people that work for you do. That's why you have them. That's why you have different levels of expertise. And that's why you find people's greatest assets and you build jobs around them. But you also need to be free from some insecurities around, if they are really successful, that it doesn't make you look bad. It only
Right,
makes you look good.
right.
Um, so I think that's very important too.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. I've seen my share of so-called leaders that chop people off at the knees in front of people. That's just not right. You just totally demoralize them and you set them back, so yeah, I appreciate that.
Another leadership trait that I think is not good, that people don't talk about a lot, is leaders who are just pretty apathetic to the
Hmm.
people that work for them. They don't act like they particularly care very much. Most of us have worked for people that don't have security as any part of their world or expertise. And obviously, you don't want to be micromanaged, and you want to be left alone to do what you do well. But
Right.
you want them to be interested. You want them to be really caring, and you want them to prioritize what you do well and what is important um, about your role and your job as essential. So I
Mhm.
think when they don't, it's very difficult for a person to stay motivated.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. There's that whole thing that people are always looking at you when you're a leader, right? And how you act towards other people and how you comport yourself. That's really important. Um, how do you, as you've had to do this your whole career, how do you develop top talent?
Oh, that's such a great question, because um, I think sometimes when you have someone who's so good at what they do, it's human. Sometimes we don't want them to go anywhere else. Sometimes we want to keep them where they are because we don't think
Right,
anyone else can do it.
right.
But I generally try to develop top talent by creating standards that are not so far in the hemisphere that people can't reach them, but that are
Mhm.
higher than what they think they can reach themselves. By helping them to get familiar with how to reach those standards, to hook them up with other people so that they can expand their skill sets, expand their perspective.
Mhm.
I do a lot of work on team building and getting people working with each other, because obviously it's far more effective than independent thought or work. Um, and constant reinforcement. People don't, as we've just said, don't always recognize what they're great at. So you have to
Sure.
remind them what they're great at, or tell them what they're great at, and be very tangible about why they're great. And I think by doing that and inviting people to take on different leadership roles, even if they don't ask for a promotion, or they don't ask to chair a committee, or they don't ask to start a committee,
Right.
or to take on a project, by saying, I think you'd be really excellent at this. And they have the deer in the headlight look, and you can know inside they're kind of, blanking a brick, so to speak. And you say to them, I know you can do this, and I'm going to be there to help you. And it's going to feel so good when you do it, and everybody's going to love this. And you get them to be willing to try, and then they do it. There is nothing more fulfilling at all than that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I was in the same boat, when with the whole ISMA thing. I remember when I was on a committee, and it was Brad Brecky. A lot of you know Brad Brecky on this podcast. Some of you may not, but he's a former CSO of Target, former FBI, and he was on the board. And he pulled me to the side. It was the same kind of thing. Hey, I think you should put in for the board. And I had the deer in the headlights, like, no, I can't do this, but he encouraged me, and so it was kind of the same thing. I agree 100%. I like that answer. I have never asked that actually of anybody. I should ask that question more. Another question I haven't asked that I think it'd be really great, because a lot of people want to know how to do things, and so how does a leader like Bonnie Michelman, how do you craft your day? There are things that you can't control, obviously, but when you think about how you're going to organize your day, how does that look like? And I know everybody's different, but how does that look like? Or is it just chaos?
Hate that question.
I know you do.
Because I feel like, all the great management gurus, Tom Peters and everybody else talked about, having a plan. And I certainly have a plan. I look at my calendar days in advance often. So I know what's coming up. I know what I need to prepare for. I put that on my calendar, but my calendar, I usually have about 13 meetings a day. So it gets so filled that I don't have any thought time. I don't have any strategic time, which I am not good, and gets put in the back burner. And then I'm feeling overwhelmed because I'm not doing the things that I think I not only love to do, but are very important. So then I have to get to the weekend when I have time to think about this and say, okay, how am I going to insert this on my calendar? How am I going to insert time for emergencies? Because there's a lot of that. When am I going to really thoughtfully answer emails and not just say, I'll get back to you, or I think it's this. Because, we all have the same amount of time. Everybody says it's a long day. It's been a long day. Everybody has the same 24 hours. It's how we choose to organize it that is useful. And in our world, particularly for those of you who aren't in, this whole crazy security industry and, in enterprise risk, it really, our priorities are not always our own. And we really are taken off scope a lot to move into emergencies. But I think it is very important to have your, I used to have, I don't do this as much anymore, A, B, and C priorities. Where, I have the A's, that I have the B's, and I put time in the calendar every week for the B's. And then the C's try to figure out like blocks of time when it might be slower that I can get to those. But staying with that organizational system, it's just important to have an organizational system and to not forget to make sure you're doing the strategic planning, and that the people that work for you are doing the strategic planning. I bug them about them more and more. And I know part of how to get rid of some of the 13 meetings a day so I can have more time for the strategic stuff is to delegate, but I delegate a lot. So I'm trying not to kill them, trying not to kill myself.
Right.
It's like drinking out of a fire hose a lot, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, you and I are probably very good readers, voracious readers of leadership books, and we try to better ourselves. And when I was at Microsoft, I tried to carve out like every Friday afternoon to do strategy, right? And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. It's to your point, if you got things you can't control, okay, fine, do you carve out time over the weekend, right? But that's the strategy you employ, because I agree with you. Leaders have to have some point where you're looking at strategy. And then unfortunately, it may take you into the weekend if you're slammed during the week.
I think another important factor, we had a speaker at ISMA a while back who talked about the time of day to do certain things. Mike, I don't know if you remember, and he was saying that many people are not particularly at their peak performance during like the 3 to 5 or 6 mark in the afternoons. And you should save that time for, me too. I'm the same way. I get tired then. I get up early. That you should save that time for simple administrative tasks and use Friday afternoon is not a good time, in my opinion, for strategic planning. I'm already thinking of weekend mode. I don't want to be too intense, but it's a good time for follow-up and closing certain things out. But maybe figuring out what your time, when you're at your rich time.
Yeah.
For many of us, it's in the morning. For many of us, it might be 10 to 2. And then using that time to do the hardest stuff and to do the stuff that requires the most thought.
Yeah, no, that's important. Yeah, I do remember the speaker, and I agree 100%. I'm with you. I'm a morning person. For me, the other thing for Friday afternoons, like I would basically ask myself from my office, go to the conference center and get a cup of coffee, open up a laptop, and barring World War III, people leave me alone so I could just do a little thinking, for some thinking.
That was
time.
great though, because you got out of your environment too.
Yeah, I got because I knew if I didn't, I would be back to doing emails and doing all this other kind of stuff, right? I
Or
just
people
know.
at your door and people wanting to.
Yeah, exactly. So that's so. You're an accomplished leader. You're at the top of your game.
I have lots left to learn.
Yes, we all do.
Leadership is a work in progress.
Right. Yeah, you're never there, and the day you say you're there is the day you start to digress, I guess, or go downhill. How do you keep your own leadership development as you continue to grow? What are the things you're doing to keep sharp or to keep on top of this journey called leadership?
I'm trying to push myself out of my comfort zone.
Okay.
So I've tried over the last example is I didn't know much about cybersecurity. I'm trying to learn more about that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make sure I'm exercising enough to keep my blood flowing correctly and to stay as fit. That needs some work. I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it. I'm trying to make sure that I'm I recently joined the Boston Speaker Series, which takes place several times a year with amazing speakers at Symphony Hall, where they're just powerful, brilliant people. So I make sure I try to do some things to educate me, to expose me to different things I'm not used to. Good. Talking to people about things that, I was recently at a meeting and I was at a dinner that night, and I was sitting next to this guy young guy who started an artificial intelligence company. I mean, this guy was beyond brilliant, Harvard, MIT brilliant. And I just wanted to pick his brain and understand a little of what was in his head about what this whole crazy area of artificial intelligence is and where it's going. So I consider myself a generalist a lot because I try to learn a little bit about a lot of stuff, but for me that works well.
Good. No, I like it. Out of your comfort zone, trying to do things in spite of a busy schedule, right? You're still trying to develop, like you said, it's always a work in progress. I love that. So thanks for saying that. So last question, I ask this of everybody, and we live in a very interesting time, in America and the world, right? There's political divisions, economic divisions, there's wars, there's all kinds of stuff going on. A lot of people are stressed because of inflation and this and that. And as leaders, we need to lead through this and make sure we keep our people motivated, hopefully, and keep moving forward. But do you consider yourself a hopeful person? And what do you see in the future in terms of where you're going to be and what you intend to do in the future?
I see myself as a very optimistic person. Sometimes people have called me Pollyanna, so maybe too optimistic at times, but I'm very hopeful about where I'm going, where we're going, where this industry is going. I tell you what worries me. You didn't ask what worries me, but I'm going to tell you. And that is the unbelievable addiction, and I'm going to use that word, and reliance on social media. And people, a lot of people not being able to come up for air for 2 seconds without a device, not knowing how to speak to each other, not knowing how to communicate in person, not seeing people in person, not talking to people on the phone, when in fact 83% of communication is nonverbal stuff and tone of voice and all of that, not just words. Words are only about 17% of communication. So we're losing that. And people are becoming less and less socially, emotionally intelligent. And I'm concerned greatly about that. I think it's going to be our downfall. I truly do. I was in a very nice restaurant Saturday night to celebrate my birthday, a place that, you don't go very often. And it couldn't have been a more special place. And I looked around, and people who were there, with a significant other, were both on their phones. I just couldn't believe it, spending a fortune to just sit on their phones separately. And I thought, this is really tragic. But I think, in terms of more direct answer to your question, my hope for myself is that I stay completely as interested and passionate in the world and in people as I always have been. I can't imagine that would change. I don't have any idea when I'm going to retire, but one thing I don't like to think about is I won't use that word ever. I will just refire, because I will never not be doing some stuff, whether it's boards or writing or consulting or training dogs or learning pickleball and redoing my tennis. I used to be a tennis teacher, and I haven't played a lot. Whatever I choose to do, I want to get very involved, but I want to do it with people. And I want to stay immersed a little bit in this industry, because I have spent a lot of years trying to advance this industry, and I want to stay involved in leadership. One of the things I do a little bit now that I hope to do more down the road is executive coaching, because I love helping develop people and getting them to feel more confident and more comfortable and excited about their own journeys. So that's my hope.
That's great. Spot on about social media, but yeah, I love that term, not retire, refire. I haven't heard that before. That's awesome. Bonnie, I think you've given the audience, the listeners here, a lot of good content that they can actually use in their own individual leadership journeys. And it's been really gratifying and to see you in person. I mean, I wish we could be in person, but at least we're talking. And the fact that you're so open about your journey. So I really appreciate it, taking your time. And the fact that we're such great friends makes this even more pleasurable. So thanks so much.
Well, Mike, thank you. And I'm so pleased and so proud of you with these books. They're awesome. And your contribution to leadership and to this industry has been immeasurable. So thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Appreciate it. Well, that's it for this edition of the Ronin podcast for this month anyway. Like I said, we've got some great speakers lined up in the future. I've got a new book coming out. We'll talk more about that later. If you like the content, tell your friends, hit the subscribe button on the screen. Make sure to pick up a copy of The Art of Ronin Leadership. And until next time, we'll be talking to you again.